welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. So with this being the economic situation, as we've just laid it out, what is now the main threat? For this one, I refer you to the commentary I did on Russia Today on Thursday, July 8th. You can see that posted at my website, tarpley.net. And, of course, tarpley.net is where you've got to go once, twice, three times a week to keep up with this situation. In other words, the basic idea is we are here in the summer of 1931. The Austrian banking system has blown up in May of 1931. The Kreditanstalt of Vienna blew up. That, of course, is Greece, Spain, Portugal. I don't want to use this word, but what these hedge fund hyenas call pigs. Well, they're hedge fund hyenas, I guess. That explains it. But now, we're now in July. So what was going on in July 1931? Well, just the bankruptcy of the entire German banking system, starting with the Donat Bank, the Darmstädter National Bank, and then the Deutsche Bank, all of them. They all blew. And this is where bank holidays were introduced, right? They were bank holidays in the whole first half of July of 1931. So 79 years ago, we're getting now the banking collapse in Central Europe. And, of course, we're steering towards September 21st, 1931, the bankruptcy of the British pound, when the Bank of England defaulted on gold payment. The pound blew. This, of course, was steered by Montague Norman, Ramsay MacDonald, and the rest of these characters, the Bank of England and the regime at the time, which of course was Ramsay MacDonald had turned away from the Labour Party and had this national unity austerity regime. So that's basically where we are. We're on target now. What's therefore the next step? The European banking crisis. Now notice the euro has stabilized. The Anglo-American blitzkrieg attack against the euro using hedge fund hyenas, right? We can reference that famous idea dinner at Moness, Crespi, and Hart back on February 8th. Soros's various pronouncements on the subject, many others, Paulson of Paulson and Company. This stuff has, for the moment, not had the effect of collapsing the euro. There has been no panic flight out of the euro so far, but now the attention switches back to the banking system. We are now in the midst of what are called the stress tests of the European banks. That is to say, Trichet of the European Central Bank has introduced a series of stress tests. Now, what are these? They are, in short, a public relations stunt. The model for these things comes from Tiny Tim TurboTax Geithner, the tax cheat, who did, along with helicopter Ben Bernanke, they did a series of stress tests of U.S. banks slightly more than a year ago. They were complete fraud. They came up with basically the idea that some of these banks needed some capital, but basically it was going to be fine. A couple of them, sold some stock. Otherwise, everything hunky-dory. Naturally, as it was pointed out by a number of people, derivatives were not included. Off-balance sheet derivatives were not part of the stress test. So they were complete frauds, because what's bankrupting the banks is that $1.5 quadrillion cancerous mass of kited derivatives, the $1.5 quadrillion derivatives bubble. So what Trichet at the European Central Bank is attempting to do is to conduct his own stress test as a publicity stunt, as a public relations gimmick. And then at the end, and the end seems to be July 23rd, mark that date, the fateful date of July 23rd, when it is promised by Merkel and others that the results of the European stress tests will be published. Well, let's see what happens. But what they're trying to do is to come up with a clean bill of health for 90 to 100 banks in Europe. Now, this is a big deal. The European banking system, 31 trillion U.S. dollars equivalent, 31 trillion. That is 3 times the U.S. banking system. It's a big mass of fictitious capital over there, too. I would say, in general, the U.S. accounts for 1 quadrillion of toxic derivatives, but Europe is up there. They've probably got 500 billion of toxic derivatives on their books. So that's what's coming. The question now is, how will it go? Will Trichet succeed? I don't think he will. You cannot conduct these phony stress tests under conditions of sustained speculative attack. And that, of course, is what the Anglo-Americans are doing. The bottom line is the Anglo-American hedge fund hyenas and zombie banks sticking to their demand to export the depression to Europe, to shift the burden of the depression onto the European financial system. They will not allow Trichet's stress tests to succeed. They will rather bring them under heavy attack. And you can see the barrage already beginning. Pick up the Financial Times, pick up Forbes, pick up the Wall Street Journal, pick up the London Economist, pick up the various flagship publications of the Anglo-American financial oligarchs, and you will see the great skepticism on the German banking crisis. And will this work? Well, no, it won't work. And the Greeks and all this other stuff. What you're getting into is the war of the dossiers, except now the war of the dossiers is the war of the lists. If you pick up these financial publications, here's what you'll find. Various zombie banks around the world are putting out lists of other zombie banks that they say are more bankrupt than they are. Let's take the example. Citibank, probably one of the most classic zombie banks in the world with their totally depressed stock price, bailed out, I guess, 3 times by the U.S. taxpayer. Citibank puts out a list saying Commerzbank of Germany is in big trouble. Dexia, a large French bank in Paris, is in trouble, and the National Bank of Greece. So that's the Citibank list. Citibank basically says, don't look at us. We're not bankrupt. Look at Commerzbank, look at Dexia, look at National Bank of Greece. Not to be outdone, Business Insider, here, Credit Suisse, one of the, what used to be the 3 banks there in the Bahnhofstrasse of Zurich. Credit Suisse, who do they say are bankrupt? Well, German Postal Savings, the German Postbank, very stupidly privatized, worked fine as long as it was a government institution, privatized, thrown into the world of speculation and all the rest. Postbank in trouble. Now, then they switched to a bunch of banks in Greece. ATE Bank of Greece is in bad shape, according to Credit Suisse. And actually, not Credit Suisse, but ATE Bank of Greece. National Bank of Greece, they seem to be on everybody's list. The Hellenic Postal Savings Bank, Hellenic Post Bank, the Piraeus Bank, and one of the oldest in Europe, Monte dei Paschi di Siena, the home of Mundell on various occasions. Monte dei Paschi di Siena. So that's the Credit Suisse list. You take your pick. Ultimately, most of these large banks are bankrupt